Crater Lake Dairy was my first real adult job. I started there in 1974, working part-time after school when I was going to college at the Oregon Institute of Technology. Crater Lake Dairy, working for Rod Murray, is where I learned how to be a milkman and the basics of the dairy industry. Things like rotation, the importance of keeping fresh product cold, and customer service. I gained a lot of experience at the dairy, and eventually Rod Murray thought enough of me to make me a route supervisor, which in essence was sort of a vacation relief driver. I can't thank Rod Murray and my friend Tom Murray enough for the experience they gave me at Crater Lake Dairy. It served me well throughout my career. In 1985, I left Crater Lake and went to work for DARIGOLD. DARIGOLD had advertised that they were opening a depot in Roseburg, Oregon. It would be a one-man depot, one truck, one guy, and one warehouse. I decided to apply for that position and get on the west side of the Cascades. The other attractive thing for me was that DARIGOLD was a bigger company, and I had thought there would be more opportunity. Becoming a milkman for DARIGOLD was an aspirational job for me. It was something I felt like I'd really hit the big time with them, working for a large corporation. DARIGOLD manager Dale Phillips hired me, and I worked with him and also had the pleasure of working with one of the best dairy salesmen I've ever known, a gentleman by the name of Cliff Fixon. I stayed there in Roseburg and built that business up and had some success there and operated that business like an entrepreneur. At that point, I left them in 1988 to go in the freight business. Oregon Freightways was a small regional, less than truckload carrier that moved into the warehouse right next to where my DARIGOLD warehouse was. So it gave me an opportunity to get to know a lot of the people there, and they had some explosive growth around 1988. I went to work for Oregon Freightways with the aspiration of becoming their branch manager in Roseburg, Oregon, which happened fairly shortly after I began working there. It was a good opportunity, and I learned a lot of new things, learned how the freight business worked, particularly the LTL freight business. Under the leadership of the president of the company, Jerry Eiler, and the VP of operations, Ernie Costanzo, Oregon Freightways was doubling their revenue year over year, and as I said, they were experiencing explosive growth. I had the opportunity to work on a lot of projects at Oregon Freightways, and eventually they offered me the position of branch manager, terminal manager in Seattle, Washington, and that's how I ended up in Seattle. All good things must come to an end, and Oregon Freightways was so successful that they ended up getting bought out by one of their larger competitors, Viking Freight Systems. The fine folks at Viking told me that they didn't need a manager in Seattle, but they sure could use a driver. I ended up driving for Viking for, I think, not quite a year. I had the downtown Seattle route. Viking was a fine company, but I was never really happy with that job and aspired to go back to work in the dairy business, and really wanted to go back to work for DARIGOLD. I answered a newspaper ad, and they were looking for route drivers, and with the help of my old manager, Dale Phillips, I got hired at DARIGOLD, and honestly, I have to tell you, it felt like coming back home again. It was 1992, and the Rainier plant general manager, Lynn Benson, hired me as an ice cream route driver for DARIGOLD. I again ended up in downtown Seattle with the downtown route. Did that for several years, and then at one point I applied for a job at DARIGOLD's corporate office in transportation. I didn't get it, but then I met my friend Mike Bevers. Mike was the director of logistics at DARIGOLD, and although he didn't give me the corporate transportation job, He did help me get a job as a foreman at the Rainier Avenue logistics operation. There were at that time over 100 drivers at the Rainier Avenue plant, so it gave me a lot of experience in a large operation that served me well. And I can also say that Mike and I are good friends today. In 1997, an opportunity became available in DARIGOLD's Boise, Idaho plant. They needed a route supervisor there, somebody to run the logistics operation. Mike Bevers offered me that job, and I took it, and in 1997 moved to Boise. The Boise job presented a lot of new challenges and opportunities. DARIGOLD changed their name to WESTFARM Foods in about 1999 or 2000 or so, somewhere around there. Fortunately, common sense prevailed, and they changed their name back to DARIGOLD in about 2005 or so. I thought this was a pretty good looking logo, and it was the one that I wore until the end of my career at DARIGOLD. During my time in Boise, I became a logistics manager for DARIGOLD, and then eventually became a senior supply chain manager and managed logistics in the states of Idaho, Utah, Montana, and Colorado. In 2011, DARIGOLD outsourced their logistics operations to a third party, a company called Estenson Logistics. I saw this as ultimately an end to my career at DARIGOLD. I have to say I cherished my years at DARIGOLD. As I said, DARIGOLD was an aspirational job for me, and I made lifetime friends there, but it was pretty clear that it was time to move on, and so I did. I had heard that Medigold Dairy, Dean Foods, had an opening for a logistics manager's position in Boise, Idaho, so I called my friend Tom Murray, who I knew worked at Dean Foods, and he looked into it and said, yes, indeed, they did have a job. So I applied for that position, and I got it. So I started then the last part of my career with Dean Foods. I was hired by Dean Foods Division Logistics Manager Lauren Roll, who quickly introduced me to who would become my boss, Division Logistics Manager Adam Brown. A couple of really great people who I really enjoyed working for at Medigold Dean Foods. Dean Foods was a little bit of a culture shock as they are a huge national publicly traded corporation. One of the things I took a lot of pride in at Medigold was every year coming up with an annual operating plan and then executing on that plan. It's always fun to hit a number that you know rolls up to Wall Street. After exactly 5 years at Dean Foods, I decided to retire and did so, and my last day was July 31st, 2018. I think back and wow, what an amazing career I've had in the dairy industry and in transportation. I thank everybody at Crater Lake Dairy, DARIGOLD, Oregon Freightways, Viking Freight System, and in the end, Medigold Dean Foods. I've made lifetime friends at all of these jobs, and I'm not going to try and name everybody. You all know who you are, and I get a little choked up just thinking about it. But thank you very much, and I look forward to a long, active retirement.